This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing and reincarnated into a god named Nebula. And he has to battle 27 other gods to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. In the previous chapter, after finding out what the Frogman was planning, RECAPS and his men went on a rampage. Surprisingly, the Frogmen had a few tricks up their sleeves, as they have a monster with them that they revered as a god. But unfortunately for the Frogmen, the lizards had a true god backing them up, and so Nebula created his own creature and made it kill the false god that the Frogmen were worshipping. With this, the Frogmen had no choice but to run away to the other side of their village. But RECAPS ain't done with them yet, and with the rage of the other lizardmen, they immediately went to chase them. Now on to the next part. The warriors submerged into the water first, and 50 more Avengers followed. 80 lizardmen swam across the lake with their snouts above the water. After they made it to the island, the parent of the young ones bolted to their children to embrace them, and Owen was one of them. Finally, their dream came true, so they cherished this moment even more, and RECAPS was glad that everything went well for them. But just as RECAPS predicted, there were about 10 lizardmen who were exhausted from the trip, so they took the children on boats and returned to the lower village. Jarl directed the healthy lizardmen to examine the injured and make them rest. RECAPS put the lizardmen who couldn't swim well onto the remaining boats and had Yor direct them to go far around the upper village. After that, Yor asked if he plans to attack the frogmen from both sides, too, which RECAPS confirmed, because he knows too well that the frogmen will be keeping an extra eye out on the lake. But now that they aren't short on numbers, they can divide into 2 groups. And this tactic had a purpose to trick their adversaries, as the 40 men he is taking can't fight well. But the frogmen will be disoriented if they show up in the dark, and once they're distracted, he will take their warriors and attack them by the lake. However, this is such a risky move even for RECAPS, so Yor couldn't help but be worried for him. So he asked RECAPS if he will be all right, and with confidence, RECAPS responded that he will be, even though there are fewer than 10 of them that can properly fight in his group. He had discovered another blessing God has given them while they were swimming to this island. This surprised Yor, so he immediately asked RECAPS what it was, out of pure excitement, to which RECAPS gladly explained to him that their scales are black, and they will glimmer under the moonlight the way water glimmers. With this, they will surely see the end sooner than later. And RECAPS' predictions were correct. All the fighting that happened at the upper village went as RECAPS had planned. The frogmen were in complete shock to see the lizardmen were already right in front of them, as they couldn't even see them coming. And they were completely in disarray as soon as they saw the numerous lizards rushing to them at both sides. With this, the frogmen panic, and therefore they were easily overpowered by the lizards. Aloy couldn't even grasp what was happening after coming out of his hut, but what is clear is that the tribe leader of the lizardmen is easily killing his well-trained warriors with ease. And without any other options, Aloy called out to his god and asked it to save him, as he had sacrificed so much just to serve him. But his god didn't answer, and RECAPS' spear just penetrated his skull, killing him in an instant. Meanwhile, Shunin bolted as soon as he witnessed his father Aloy getting stabbed several times with a spear to his death. He was indeed a coward through and through, and so he hid himself inside a hut, while his men died one by one. He heard their scream and plea for their leader to step in and guide them, but his coward ass couldn't even move his legs no more. So he stayed at one spot, hoping that this would just end. But as time passed, desperate, and with nothing else to do but stay put, his mind was filled with questions, and so he cried out to his dead god, but his dead god, who is now cut into many pieces, didn't answer. And so Shunin was left in the dark just waiting for something to happen, and he wasn't confident to go out, since the healthy frogmen had already run away from the village, and the only frogmen getting caught by the lizardmen were those afflicted with the itching disease, and thus had trouble breathing. Still, he was trying to hold on to hope, so he was thinking that even if his enemy has more warriors, they have way more people. There are some men that have the disease but can still fight, and there are also lots of men that are old but still have the energy to shoot arrows. If they could just buy some time to get themselves together, they would have a chance to fight back. But Shunin soon realized there wasn't really anyone to do that. His father Aloy was a brave warrior back in his heyday, but from some point, to be exact, from the day the two-headed fiend awoke from the lake, Aloy had become enchanted by the two-headed fiend's prowess. As long as sacrifices were offered, the two-headed fiend granted anything that Aloy wished to do, and through that, Aloy was able to eliminate his competitors, drive out hostile tribes, and defeat cockatrices. This seemed like a good deal at first. But once Aloy stopped doing things on his own, and instead had his god do everything for him, he became less and less like a warrior. Since everyone had learned the qualities of a warrior from Aloy, the frogmen who should have become courageous actually learned how to deceive others and act weak. They've all become cowards, and he became one as well. However, it was too late of a realization. Shunin wanted to run out and tell the frogmen to not be scared, and that they still had a chance. He could picture himself shooting arrows into the heads of the lizardmen and leading the frogmen to turn the tides, but it was all nothing but fantasy. Shunin hid in a hut as he saw the lizardmen warriors running nearby. The black-scaled lizardmen were faster and more agile than he was, so he wouldn't be able to run away. He listened quietly to the last of the screams that the frogmen were letting out before taking a look outside, making sure no one was there. But as he did this, a lizardman already took notice of the hut he was hiding at and was now behind him, which startled Shunin, so he whirled around and unconsciously reached toward his quiver to grab an arrow, but he had already wasted them all. He had successfully shot a few into some lizardmen, but none of the wounds he inflicted were fatal, and the poisonous frogs were useless. This was the consequence of relying on poison. It became a habit to aim at body parts that weren't vital, and then the shadow revealed its face. It was RECAPS, and he was there to end him. But as a warrior himself, he told Shunin to get up and draw his sword, as he will allow him to at least keep his honor. But just like before, Shunin was a coward, so instead of doing what RECAPS said, he just groveled in the ground and asked RECAPS to spare him. But he is not planning to do that. He wanted to erase every frogman from their village. But even before he could set things straight with Shunin, Shunin revealed a rather pitiful aspect of his character. He resorted to an obvious lie, claiming that they have built their friendship over the last few times they met, and he have no ill feelings towards them lizardmen. They were just threatened by the two-headed fiend. But his pathetic attempts hadn't convinced RECAPS, so Shunin racked his brain for words. With this, he decided to tell him a secret. And just as expected, he noticed a sudden change on RECAPS' face, showing that he was intrigued by it. And so he tells RECAPS that he will reveal to him the way to make a bow, especially about the material of the bowstring. But before he tells him, he needs to promise that he will let him live. But even before he could state his proposal, RECAPS told him to get straight to the point. Shunin then realized he wasn't in the position to bargain, and so he did what he was told, revealing to RECAPS that they're made out of the tendons in men's backs. And RECAPS was immediately convinced. He knew it would be the tendons of some kind of animal, but something always seemed off, because they could only make this if the tendons belonged to those who walked on 2 feet, as it would be the only suitable materials to make a bow long enough for the frogmen. This led RECAPS to ask Shunin from which species were the back tendons used to make their bows, and as soon as RECAPS asked this, Shunin realized the grave mistake that he had made. But there was no turning back now, and lying wasn't an option either, so with a frustrated expression, he answered that it was from the lizardmen. With that, RECAPS tilted his head, causing his face to be hidden in the shadows again. Only RECAPS' eyes were shining, and Shunin had no clue what RECAPS was thinking. But now Shunin was prepared for death. He knew he couldn't recover from that, and any reason that he could say would just be meaningless. So he just bowed his head and waited for his inevitable death to come. However, the words that came out of RECAPS' mouth were unexpected. Instead of killing him on the spot, RECAPS just permits him to go, even though he believes that it's questionable if there's really any grace or resentment between them. But he has already achieved a perfect victory, and Shunin also offered a deal, so he accepted it as a fair trade. And if that wasn't convincing enough, RECAPS stepped aside from the entrance of the hut. With this, Shunin hurriedly ran away, afraid that RECAPS might change his mind, so he didn't even realize there was a familiar lizardman next to RECAPS. And as Shunin was running frantically, Owen then asked RECAPS if he's really just letting him go, to which RECAPS confidently responded that he is, because he needs a moving target. RECAPS had been thinking he should slowly begin practicing with moving targets. He thought of the trick Owen had taught him before, and that is before releasing the bowstring. He has to hold his breath and look directly at the target. It was hard for RECAPS to understand at first, and he thought it was a fake trick. But when he was practicing his bow skills with Shunin, he used this technique and made a direct hit on the plank. Even Shunin was impressed, and if he practices more, Shunin thinks that he will be good as his warriors. This puzzled RECAPS, as he had hit the middle of the target, so he doesn't get why it wasn't enough. And so Shunin clarified that what he did is not all there is to a bow. He has both strength and accuracy, but he takes too long to fire an arrow. In response, RECAPS clarified that he only did this since he believes that he should inflict fatal wounds precisely rather than roughly hitting them. This remark of his only made Shunin laugh, as he thinks that RECAPS' reason was expected from a guy who hadn't used a bow in combat. So he pointed out to RECAPS that in actual combat, the target moves. Slowing down or stopping the target comes first. The final blow is what comes after. And this was a sound explanation, so RECAPS made sure to remember it. And seeing that RECAPS seems to trust him more, Shunin being the sly bastard that he was, he told RECAPS with enthusiasm in his voice that if they truly become friends, he will also teach him how to make a bow, because the ingredients could also be acquired by a lizard man quite easily. However, there was a hint of malice in his tone, Even the other frogman who was with him couldn't even contain their smile as Shunin had said this. But Rakrak haven't got a clue on what it was before. But now that he does, Rakrak's irritation and anger towards Shunin intensified more than ever. And so it only took a moment to let go of the bowstring, and using the trick that Owen taught him, the arrow released from the bow passed through both of Shunin's ankles, and Shunin fell to the ground in an unsightly manner. And the grayish-brown lizardmen who were waving their bloody wooden clubs around in search for a target to take revenge on, heard Shunin scream, and without hesitation, they rushed towards him, intent on carrying out acts of unimaginable cruelty, the kind that only arises from the darkest depths of the human mind. They were meticulous in ensuring he remained alive throughout, driven by the belief that a swift death would be too merciful for him. After that ordeal was over, a few days had passed, and Rakrak was still practicing his archery. By shooting the head of a frogman that was tied up and rotting, he had used it as a target for a long time, and as he was about to go for another strike, Owen, who was beside him, commented that the quality of the new bow seems to have improved considerably, as it was now able to fly as far as the bows the frogmen used, and they preferred to use a new bowstring, even though the previous one was a good bow that could be used for a long time. But after what they found out from Shunin, they couldn't use the old bows anymore, as it was still made from one of their fallen brothers and sisters, and they believe that they can always make another bow, until they find a better way to make bows than the frogmen did. They're going to use the back tendons of the frogmen to make bows in the meantime. But with the new string attached, Rakrak was dissatisfied, because if one pulls a little more, the bow will break, so it would be nice to have material to strengthen the bow. But the problem is, they couldn't find stronger materials in the area that they were in, so it seems like he can't just stay in this forest. But his reasons is not only to make a better bow, as he had learned from the Stargazer that this mountain area would become very cold once winter came. The lizardmen would become physically weaker, but they could endure the winter by making fires and wearing leather. However, the buffaloes that Rakrak's clan had were the problem, since water buffaloes of the wilderness would go to warmer places to avoid the winters, where there would still be grass. So few of them really have to leave to raise the water buffaloes, and the water buffaloes had already given birth once and were adjusting well. As time passed, the herd would get large and become a long-term food source for the lizardmen, just as Yor had initially envisioned. With that explained, Rakrak continued with his archery training. But Owen wasn't beside Rakrak to see him practice, but rather he was here to do his duty as a new warrior of their clan. And that is to report that they have finally exterminated the frogmen wandering around their area. This was a problem they had for a few weeks. Even though many frogmen had died, there were more frogmen who had run away, and Rakrak guessed there were about more than 1,000 of them, as there was a limit to how many frogmen the 30 warriors and grayish-brown lizardmen could kill in one night. And so, with the help of Owen and Jael's intelligence, Rakrak devised a plan to exterminate the frogmen who are just loitering around near their village. And Rakrak doesn't plan on capturing them and turn them into slaves, like how the frogmen did, even though it would be logical if they did that. And he believes that might even be their justifiable right since they fought and won. However, they have already seen the frogmen become weak once because of it, so they can't do that again. With this reasoning, Owen realized how incredible of a leader Rakrak truly is. It wasn't simply because the god Rakrak believed in was strong, because Rakrak was still going to fight the two-headed fiend even if his god wasn't there to help him. He would have fought even if there was no miracle, and he would have done so, even if he wasn't the tribal chief or a warrior. The courage he has to fight may be the reason why he is who he is today. And Rakrak not only tried to cautiously approach the frogmen, but he did the same with the grayish-brown lizardmen. To Rakrak it seemed that the grayish-brown lizardmen had also been ruled by another tribe, just like what happened to the blue-scaled lizard. But even though they had warmed up to the other lizardmen, they still were a bit wary toward Rakrak's tribe as a whole once their desires for revenge had calmed down, as they've experienced the horror of being controlled by a bigger group. And Rakrak wanted to protect the grayish-brown lizardmen, and were welcoming them into their fold. But this is different from what happened with the other blue-scaled lizard. As it was their first time seeing this tribe, they also have about 200 lizardmen, which is quite a lot. Not to mention their culture is very different, and in addition to that, they have an experience of being tricked by simple courtesy. So a method like that wouldn't work. With this, Rakrak was deeply troubled about how to go about it. But surprisingly, the answer came from the grayish-brown lizardmen themselves. When Owen was reporting what had happened while he was hunting the remaining frogmen, Jael was walking towards them but stopped as she had noticed a young lizardman hiding behind the trees, and so she approached the youngling to ask him why he is hiding. But this just gave the little one a mini heart attack, and before the little lizard could respond, Joel took notice of the item the little one had dropped. This sparked curiosity in her, so she took it to take a closer look. It seems like a well-crafted wood sculpture of their guardian, so she immediately went to Rakrak and showed it to him. and Rakrak was also surprised, as he thinks it's beautiful and nicely made, which made the little one happy, and so he willfully gave it to the tribal leader. And initially Rakrak was hesitant, so he asks the little one if he is sure. The kid didn't respond properly as he was just happy to see the tribe leader, but Owen told him it will be okay, because among the children in their village these days, making and exchanging things like this has become popular. To confirm what Owen was saying, Jael asked the kid if other children in his village have many of these as well, which the kid enthusiastically confirmed. And that is because the guardian who saved them is really a magnificent and great being. The kid's feeling is akin to a child adoring a superhero, but that superhero is real, and by the looks of it, this was the answer that Rakrak was searching for, a way for them to connect with the new tribe members, the grayish-brown lizardmen. And with the approval of his wife, Rakrak told Owen that he wished he had more of this stuff, which Owen gladly responded that he will help him look for more in the village. And with that, shine filled Rakrak's eyes once again, as he had overcome another problem. But before they could do that, Rakrak asked Owen to continue his report that was interrupted earlier, and so Owen did just that. As he was tracking down a group of frogmen, which he ordered to, they were led to cave that the frogmen were hiding in. It takes about half a day to get there from the lake. They killed all of them without much trouble. But the cave was a bit strange, and as expected, Rakrak showed interest in what Owen had said, so he asks him to explain further. And so Owen did just that. As they went into the cave, they noticed there was another entrance that seemed to have been carved out, but he is not sure how they carved the hard rock, and so Rakrak was hooked to check it out himself. Rakrak took Owen in jail and went down to the village. Rakrak thought it was something worth checking out, but Nebula already knew what it was. It's an ancient ruin, and he was contemplating if it is okay now to traverse an ancient ruin. But contrary to Nebula's worries, Rakrak already seemed interested. Rakrak had been exposed to too many things ever since he was young to turn down an adventure. Rakrak had lost both his parents when he was a child, so he had to grow up without anyone's help. And he had also fought a saber-toothed tiger to protect his tribe at the time when they had gotten kicked out into the wilderness. And all of the other things after that. Rakrak's life had been full of excitement. He didn't think of a new adventure as something dangerous, but rather as a trigger that could change the future. And thus, as the next day arrived, Rakrak and Jael started their journey and were accompanied by 6 additional warriors. Owen was also with them as their guide. Meanwhile, Nebula was a little worried, because he knows that the ancient ruins are a little different than his followers expected, and they might be disappointed of it. Unlike the fiends and abominations who appeared according to a player's divinity level, locations of ancient ruins were already set at the beginning of the game, which meant that the difficulties of the challenges were also predetermined. Therefore, at this stage of the game, it wouldn't be surprising for Rakrak to be stopped at the entrance to the ancient ruin without even the chance to give the challenge a go, due to not meeting the challenge requirements, commonly known as an invisible wall. But even in that case, it's still worth discovering an ancient ruin, even if it may be useless right now. Rakrak has lots of interest in writing, so his clan or their descendants may discover it later on. There were a few kinds of things that could be obtained just by successfully entering ancient ruins. First, there's ancient knowledge. Ancient knowledge was also known as ancient technology. It was called ancient, but in the game The Lost World, ancient things were comparable to things in the most modern and advanced civilizations. Entering these kinds of ancient ruins could yield advanced knowledge and technology that had degenerated over time. But usually it isn't even possible to get past the entrance if the level of civilization is too low. No matter what, the doors to an ancient ruin would never open accidentally, and in many cases required various archaeological knowledge on technology of the era right before the era of the ancient ruin. Nebula actually thought of these ancient ruins as technology farming dungeons made for the progression of the game, so there's no need for ancient knowledge to be given in ruins at this stage of time. So then the only possibility would be that the ruins will give rank knowledge or skills. Just like livestock farming and agriculture, being able to obtain knowledge and technology indicated that the level of civilization was still low. Knowledge and technology would eventually be developed over time, so it wasn't necessary to discover an ancient ruin, but acquiring various kinds of knowledge and technology never hurt, and at the moment, it seems like rank knowledge would be the best to have. That way, it would also be possible to adequately raise Rakrak's, Jael's, or Owen's XP. Obtaining something did feel good, but what was obtained could be difficult to use at times. Just like mystery, among the ancient ruins, there were cases where the ruins themselves had special powers. These special powers included automatically creating special resources, colonies of particular organisms being formed, converting certain resources to other resources, cursing or blessing the surrounding areas, or applying a status effect to a tribe or species that think they have ownership of the ruin. Mysteries themselves are good most of the time. The only problem is most mysteries are predetermined. It'll be hard for RECAPS clan to properly utilize a mystery as they're already thinking of livestock farming. Splitting the clan wasn't a problem, but their geographical location was. Mysteries weren't always good, and Nebula had already led RECAPS clan into the inner part of the peninsula, far away from the other players. Even if the mystery was on the good end, it would be hard to properly utilize it. When beginners obtain a mystery, they try to somehow change their builds to take advantage of it, but in reality, mysteries rarely play a significant role in winning the game. Nebula always believed in the statistics of the Lost World, and there was another thing that he wished he wouldn't get other than these mysteries, and that is a demonic ruin. Getting into the ruin wouldn't be too bad as long as it wasn't that kind of ruin, but upon reaching the entrance, RECAPS and Jaol noticed that the inscriptions were similar to those on the golden tablet they had previously acquired. Promptly, they decided to open the entrance, and despite the door's weight, RECAPS managed to move it. As the door opened, revealing what lay beyond, an entity on the other side was suddenly awakened. This being greeted them with a chilling welcome to a realm that Nebula had hoped didn't exist, a demonic world. In here stairs seemed to descend endlessly into the depths, while flashes of lightning sporadically illuminated the ominous space.